Okay, quick little add-on here before we kick off the episode. And talking about accessory work and bodybuilding, one thing I didn't touch on is that I think in a lot of cases they can be both really useful for people recovering from injury. So also something to think about, but here we go. All right, got the alternate intro music, so you know what that means. Time for a, very belated Friday Fitness Files. I was doing a little bit of traveling this week, and I was out in California. Spent some time at CrossFit. I don't know if it's Ranch or CrossFit The Ranch. I should probably know that. Down there in Aromas, site of the first CrossFit Games back in 2007, and the CrossFit Games in 2008 and 2009 as well, before I moved to the, I don't know what it's named now, but the StubHub Center in LA, and then moved around since then. I feel like we did some good work out there, and excited to see what everybody thinks. Excited to see what people think of that. So anyway, I got 2 questions today from Logan, so appreciate that. And anybody who does listen, if you have questions, coaching, fitness related, CrossFit related, please send them in. It's always thought-provoking, interesting. Helps me get things going. But he was asking, here are my thoughts on 2 subjects. One is accessory work and bodybuilding in a CrossFit program. And then fatigue management to keep training productive and consistent, which I'm excited to talk about that one because I feel like on my algorithm, that topic's been bubbling up. People saying like, don't do CrossFit, it burnt me out. Or here's what I learned after CrossFit burnt me out. Or 10 reasons why CrossFit will burn you out, that kind of stuff, which I feel like I could say about anything that I've invested a lot of time into in my life, but we'll get there maybe. So accessory work and bodybuilding in a CrossFit program. Maybe make a little bit of just delineation here between accessory work and bodybuilding. Bodybuilding, I feel like, are the isolation movements, specifically and this, man, I don't want to, because I have some friends who have competed in bodybuilding, figure competition, stuff like that. So I don't want to demean this at all, but I might just define, I wonder what the dictionary says, or the internet. I might define bodybuilding, as like focused at, purely an aesthetic goal. Bodybuilding definition. Let's take a look. Research, but jumped on the Google machine. Bodybuilding is a sport and exercise regime that focuses on building muscle mass and improving body composition. And involves a combination of blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the goal of bodybuilding is building muscle mass and improving body composition, which is also a little bit different than CrossFit's goal, which is increased fitness, work capacity across broad time and modal domains. Not saying that having more muscle mass and different body composition couldn't contribute to that, but the CrossFit goal is a lot broader than the bodybuilding goal. Also, the movement types, I think, each bodybuilding and CrossFit have a specific set of movement types that go into them. So my thoughts on 2 subjects, accessory work and bodybuilding in CrossFit program. When I hear accessory work, I think this is a massive bucket. My short answer is yes, add accessory work in. And I think I used to say all the time that if your accessory work is not derailing your training, you're not doing enough. Obviously, I meant that as, or maybe I said you're doing it wrong. Obviously, I meant that as a joke. But for me, I see accessory work as like technique work, finishers, post-workout, things that help you focus on movement quality or maybe working weaknesses related to any of the movements and or workouts that fall into, the CrossFit bucket. So I think accessory work makes a lot of sense. I think 2 of the pitfalls that happen with accessory work, and this goes kind of back to my joke of like, if your accessory work does not totally derail your training, you're not doing it right, is that a lot of times I see people just wanting to go through a motion for accessory work. Like they just want to be able to say they did something else. And, I do think in a lot of cases, accessory work needs to be intentional, pointed, and challenging in order to see some results attached to it. So that is something to think about. You don't need to do Fran back to back, but if you're going to be like, hey, my pull-ups suck and I want to work on pull-up technique, you got to put some intention behind it. You actually have to work on those things and try and track it to make it better. So yeah, accessory work, fantastic. I think for coaches, passing this down to athletes, just great to understand their why and great to understand what their goals are and try and guide them there effectively. For individuals, this can be one of those things where you're like, I just want to do my CrossFit workout and then add some other stuff in there. Sure. Like I said, I'm less righteous about this. I'd try and more equip people with the pitfalls to watch out for. Things like, is doing the accessory work making you annoyed? Is it leading you to be less effective in your main course workout? That kind of stuff. But yeah, I think accessory work is absolutely great. I see specific warm-ups in workouts, especially in class workouts or CrossFit. Specific warm-ups are accessory work. Shrugs. I think you'd have a hard time convincing me otherwise, because they're building sometimes the strength, sometimes the technical capability for us to be better at movements or be better at a workout. Maybe even practicing things like different strategies, cycling barbells versus singles. So that is one type of accessory work. Doesn't always have to happen post-workout. I just think the biggest difference is that typically in CrossFit workouts, the goal is the intensity. So either more rounds and reps or doing the thing faster. And the goal of accessory work is usually not one of those two things. Okay, bodybuilding. So bodybuilding, focusing on building muscle mass and improving body composition. I don't have any problem with people adding this into their CrossFit program. Again, I think it's just I'm a big fan of understand what you're doing, understand that it's different than the program is defined, understand that it might derail you or frustrate the general CrossFit goals. I've seen this kind of go in and out of style in my experience inside of CrossFit. It's like the functional bodybuilding thing. Just adding like little goofy finishers post-workout. A lot of this, if you're coaching class, is class dependent. What is the vibe of the class? I could always throw some, tricep extensions and bicep curls at my 5:30, 6:30 a.m. classes, and they love it. Other classes throughout the day, maybe don't like it as much. It falls outside of, if you're, solely focused on CrossFit, it does kind of fall outside of our charter, the bodybuilding stuff. So you also want to watch out for that the program doesn't totally shift over to just bodybuilding, or that becomes the main focus of the session, because it's very different than what we're trying to accomplish when it comes to CrossFit. So those are all things to think about. I think it can be a really good way to attack some specific weaknesses in terms of muscle mass and body composition, how we look, feel, and perform. Might even help you balance out some muscle imbalances. One of the things I encourage people to do, first is try and utilize the functional movements, the movements that move large loads long distance quickly, in a way that sort of is, I don't want to say bodybuilding-ish because that's not it, but incorporating things like strict work, different styles of a family of movements, for example. So like stop only doing kipping pull-ups, do L pull-ups, do different grips pull-ups, do pull-ups on ropes, pull-ups on bars. I think I said different grips, that kind of stuff. Squatting is another great example. Like if all you're doing is squatting, like are you lunging? Are you weighted lunging? Are you weighted stepping up? Are you doing single leg squats? Push-ups, another awesome example. Are you doing push-ups, narrow grip, wide grip, push-ups on rings? You guys get the idea. So another nice way to think about it is also like, especially I like the pull-up one because, I think about the ring row. A lot of movements that we use as scaling options for somebody if they don't have a movement. So often if you don't have pull-ups, you do a ring row. Those are movements where most of us, once we get the thing, once we get our pull-up, once we get our muscle up, we stop doing all that prerequisite stuff. That foundational stuff. Once somebody gets a ring muscle up, they not in all cases, but in most cases, they're like, well, I'm never doing a ring support or a ring dip hold or a slow negative or kip swings with a false grip or strict ring pull-ups ever again. I'm just going to keep doing muscle ups. I think if we put some diligence around, those foundational pieces that lead us up to, getting some of these fancier functional movements, that can, especially when it comes to doing CrossFit, that can be even more effective than just focusing on bodybuilding. But if you do have somebody, and I will say this, CrossFit too, just the program of CrossFit makes some pretty beautiful bodies in terms of muscle mass and body composition, especially if you tie in the nutrition point and the consistency point, in my opinion. But if somebody really wants to add those pieces in, I think it can be useful. But you do just have to, when you start sort of adding these new things in and kind of changing the prescription and goal of CrossFit, you really just have to pay attention to the results. I've never done a lot of bodybuilding. That's why I still have these scrawny little noodle arms, but I got a lot stronger doing mostly CrossFit. I certainly supplemented more weightlifting in, throughout all of just my non-competitive and competitive CrossFit career. So I don't know if that answered the question, but those are my general thoughts on it. Don't have a huge reaction against it if people want to do it. Particularly me, I don't love accessory work and the bodybuilding stuff. It just has never been super interesting to me. It's kind of why I liked CrossFit so much. I like practicing CrossFit movements. I like practicing stepping stones of CrossFit movements. So I don't mind practicing kip swings and negatives and holds. I think holds is another one of these like accessory work bodybuilding areas. It's like super underutilized. So I would encourage people to take a look at those. And that's kind of what I have to say on accessory work and bodybuilding. Nobody's carrying enough weight and holding enough weight often enough. I feel pretty strongly about that. It's something I've always been bad at, but whenever I start to sprinkle it in, sled pushes, I often feel a lot better. So tip my hat to that one. And we're 11 minutes in, so maybe we'll do an extended bonus weekend edition of the Friday Fitness Files. And we'll continue that in another episode because I do want to talk about the fatigue management. Keep training productive and consistent. But those are my thoughts on accessory work and bodybuilding in a CrossFit program. Hope that was more helpful to you than it sounds like it was to me. Anyway, we'll keep rolling. Appreciate y'all. Keep the questions coming and talk to you soon.